It's a tech conference, so we must have some technical difficulties. So let's see, how many of you today use Google Maps? Wow. That's a really, I'm really happy to see that what I'm going to talk about is all the efforts that me and a lot of hundreds of other people put in that is used by all of the people here now. And it's going into a direction where we thought, and it has given a purpose to general public, to economy, and that's all I will be talking about, going behind the scene, how we started, how we went through all the difficulties, we come across the challenges, we come across over it, and then how everything was graduated to Google Maps where everybody can use it today, and how the economic benefits start on it. And how many of you know how Google Map works? Okay, so that would be an interesting talk because I will be going through a bit of a background like how Google Map works and where they get their data from, and how all the different mapping products like Google Earth and Panorama and Google Street View, they all collaborate to each other. Right, we're ready. So I'm talking about Google Maps in general and a digital landscape of Pakistan, the impact of Google Maps that it had on Pakistan. So starting with the simple, how we get the information from, today with the smartphones or even just not even a smartphone, it's quite easy to get some information, is just few taps away. And this information could be in many formats, like we're looking for maybe a personality, maybe looking for a country, maybe we're looking for a local business. When we come back to local business, the local business is a type which is a very specific type of information. It is based on a location based, and it involves a lot of other things, the accuracy, the visual representation of the business. So that brings us to this, where location-based information brings in interaction, and it is more user-friendly to the people when they are searching for it. So simply, if you're looking for like a local butcher shop or something on Google Maps, for example, or just simply in Google, you will see results with the maps on it. So your location-based information or search result, they become more interactive when they are given a map behind it. They become more visually representative, they are more interactive, and they are highly engaging because then you can see the relevant information, you can see the information that is, maybe it's not accurate, and you could also engage with that to work it out, if you can correct it, or if you really needed that information. And Google Maps is like one of the tools that we use. Launched in 2005, it started as a web application. And if we're looking at the Pakistan at that point, it was a blank screen. There was nothing apart from our administrative boundaries, which was a bit frustrating because when I was in the UK and I started using Google Maps, and I was like, I could go one place to another place by looking at it. Just be aware, at that point, there was no navigation in Google Maps, and it was just like looking at a location, and you would just could walk towards it. With time, they added a lot of other things which provided quite a bit of rich interface. So high definition satellite imagery was one of them. What it basically added was the interactivity. You could see your home, you could see your school, and Pakistan was still missing the map data, although you could see all the satellite images of the Pakistan, you could see the mountains, you could see the seaside, you could see all the tall buildings. Then they added Street View, that was around 2007-8. So we were still at the place that Pakistan was nowhere, empty, blank slate. And it wasn't only the Pakistan, it was basically all the underdeveloped and the the nations which didn't have any digital presence of their maps. The maps we had at that point was basically school maps, paper maps. They were coming from the Geological Survey of Pakistan. They were not very detailed, apparently security reasons. So they were giving very high level point of interest on those maps. I don't know if any of you is as old as I am. So I studied Mutaliya Pakistan in my school. And there were maps about where we find the mines in different parts of the countries. And that map had a collaboration of different points of interest on a single map. And you could tell this is a mine, this is a tourist point, and such. So after Street View, in the same time, about 2007 and 8, they added a turn-by-turn navigation. Pakistan was still far behind. Turn-by-turn navigation was for driving, walking, cycling, even for ferries now, for air now. So then in 2008, we had a new product, which was a bit similar to Google Maps, and it was named as Google Map Maker. It was initiated by the Indian Google team in Hyderabad, and there was a person called Lalit, who was the idea originator of this. And they based it on the national disasters they had in India, basically a huge flood. And they didn't have the accuracy of locations to facilitate the relief and rescue efforts. So Lalit came up with the idea, and Google started working on it, and they made this platform where users were allowed to go on this platform and draw on satellite imagery. It was quite fun. It was like you're looking at the satellite imagery and you are drawing on it, and you could draw at the start roads, you could start some polygons or some shapes. So it was an interesting idea. So I came across Google Map Maker just by chance, because Google Maps started giving a link in their main interface, and you could switch to Google Maps from there. And I was like fascinated. Okay, that's great. I can map Pakistan now. So started from my hometown. I'm from Wazirabad. So I started from Wazirabad, and I could literally see like there is some other activity going on around the country. So I started following, and I could see like there are loads of other people like me who are also doing the same thing. So I figured out a few, and we made up a team, and then we started working in a more organized way. Which also led us to create communities around the world. So started from local areas where were the teams, and then we had the communities which were based on a regional level, like Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, UAE. So considering you see all the maps around Pakistan, they were developed in the same time as the Pakistan maps were developed. And we did have a lot of conferences, workshop and sessions. We named them originally mapping parties. And we had in Pakistan in 2010 and 11. We had it here, one in Lums. We had in Islamabad in Fast. And we had one in Karachi as well. They were quite successful. We had a session. It's like 50, 60 people sit down and they will map an area. And the idea was that you map and the other people will moderate your mapping, and they will basically, they will validate your editing if it's good enough to go on the maps or not. With the great power comes with the responsibility as well. So regional conflicts, so when you are working on a huge thing like a country, you also come across with the conflict such as neighbors and also internals. So there was like a war where that started on the administrative boundaries of Pakistan and India, and also in Afghanistan. So eventually we reached to a conclusion that the Google had to lock down the boundaries according to the United Nations, and they were no more be editable. And then the conflicts remained in the internal ones. So admin boundaries, for example, we had conflicts. How would we know where Lahore ends? Because every 6 months, Lahore expands. It's just there is another village coming into Lahore. So we approached Geological Survey for this, and their answer was like, how do we know? They are the responsible people to map Pakistan. Basically, they are the geographical reference of Pakistan. So they didn't have an accurate idea. And there were small organizations which were working against these geological boundaries and their restrictions. But till date, there is no defined boundaries for the towns and cities. So this is what you see when you type in Lahore is just a reference, which is an ideal reference. It's not actually accurate reference. Then there are other conflicts. So MapMaker was open to abuse because anybody could just register a Gmail account and they could just go and edit. And we had a Osama bin Laden capture in Abbottabad. That saw a massive amount of abuse because everybody wanted to drop a pin and say, that's where he was captured. That's where he was captured. So, and that went through a lot of moderation, which was a huge risk. We had to, then we ended up with the Apple versus Android. I don't know if anybody remember that because somebody drew a droid. Sorry, mind my language, but pissing on Apple. And it created a huge press conflict in Europe. I don't know if it did it here. MapMaker had to be closed for 2 months because they wanted to pick up the moderation to another level and put some artificial intelligence into it. But these are the conflicts which also had a lot of fun in there when we were working with it. Challenges by the status quo was basically when you see there is a huge activity going on a platform which is in a public hand and there is no control on it, then a state wants to put a control on it. So they started putting some references in the media about this, that how it is bad for security, how it's bad for this and that. And there were the challenges at that point where everybody had to hide their identity because nobody wanted to be captured or picked up or something. And it didn't long last, but it was a hard time for all the mappers because everybody was so interested in mapping their areas, but they came across these challenges that they couldn't actually fight against. And that led to actually an end of MapMaker. So MapMaker as a product was graduated into Google Maps. That means all the data that we created eventually went into Google Maps and Google MapMaker was discontinued. So at the moment, Google MapMaker is no more. You can only edit things in Google Maps directly. Unfortunately, we're still really, really sad about that one. But let's see, while we had it, how it impacted lives in Pakistan. So in a general life, we had increased public interest in geography, basically. So lots of people who didn't know, like a visual representation of their town, who didn't know like where their town is actually in Pakistan, they could reference it. They could tell like I'm near Lahore, I'm near Gujranwala, I'm near Sindh, I'm somewhere in there. And also it's an open access to information, which is huge because everybody can go on and they can access things they need. I used Green Bike today and I could use it with Google Maps. I use Uber, I use it with the Google Maps. They're all based in all these location-based technologies. This last one is basically a feedback from a school teacher in very early days. So when school teachers are allocated into different exam centers, it's difficult for them to find the schools because it's a new area, it's a new place. And we had this feedback from teacher. I couldn't find the actual reference in the email, but he wrote us an email and he said that, thank you for this. I could find my allocated exam center in minutes with maps. It was just a huge, huge helpful. So we had economic benefits. We see today we had successful companies working in Pakistan which use the location-based maps. And these all maps are based on all these contributions that hundreds of people have done. In public sector, we had PTIB as the top department using these maps. They created loads and loads of apps which controlled and managed a lot of public sector departments, and they were location based, whether it be a school attendance or teacher attendance in school or a dengue eradication. So it was all helpful in there. KPITB came in later, but they also following the full step of PTIB, and they're using the Google Maps and the other maps-based technologies in their public sector department applications. One of the biggest outcome that we saw of these maps was natural disasters. So everything I spoke before actually came after this. This was while we were mapping. The first one was Hunza Landslide. If you remember, there was a big, massive landslide at Hunza, which actually blocked the Hunza River. And it created a big lake where everybody go as a tourist now. But it was actually a result of a natural disaster. Soon after that, we had floods. I will go in details right after that. In floods, it was so helpful. It was helpful in identifying the locations which were not in government sector maps. So I will show you how government actually incorporated all this data into their relief and rescue efforts. And then we had an incident, unfortunate air crash near Islamabad airport at landing. It was actually outside of Rawalpindi, and nobody could locate the exact location of this. So the mappers just went up, and local mappers who were down in the area, they actually provided with the GIS data, or the real-time location, and we mapped the area, and the relief and rescue efforts were facilitated quite a lot in there. So starting with the Atabad Hunza landslide, which happened in 2010, it was a massive slide. It buried like three villages, and in result, it created a big lake by blocking a river, which submerged another 3 villages in there. So everybody who is boating on this lake is actually boating on top of the villages. And this was the map at that point. So if you look at it, that's the, I think that's too bright for my pointer, but that's the point where Atabad you can see, that's where the landslide happened. And the facilitation of rescue and relief efforts, it was so difficult to reach that area and to find out where exactly it happened. It was only possible if we could provide some more GIS data to all the organizations working at the ground. And within days, mappers just jumped on it and they mapped the whole area. And it was so useful all the way up, and the relief efforts coming down from Gilgit, and they were facilitated quite a lot with that. And this is the lake that was created. And then we created a portal. So we wanted to facilitate the relief efforts a bit more, because there are hundreds of relief organizations working on the ground, and they don't have the coordination between them. So we created like a single page portal, and we collected data from all of them, and we overlaid on it. So this was helpful if like Red Crescent wanted to go there and they wanted to provide some relief efforts. They knew how many people are already there who were working on it, and how many more logistics they need. So we went further ahead. As soon as we started getting data from United Nations and the local bodies, and we started putting all of them on top of the map. And the base layer of this map was the Google Map Maker. So as soon as we were updating the Google Map Maker maps, it was just showing up there. So it was a jointly facilitated both ends. I think 6 months, a year after that, Pakistan floods, they happened, and they were massive floods. They were one of the largest disasters in Pakistan. This was the impact of those floods. Basically, it was the flood that was coming from different rivers and joined right at the Sindh level, and it actually swiped all the living and the settlements towards the Manchar Lake. and all the way into the Sindh and the Karachi. And we extended the same portal for this one to facilitate all the efforts, although it was a double or triple impact than actually the Hunza Landslide one. And there were like information that we added, because this is where the public information is how it is useful for everybody. So this is Red Crescent, and Red Crescent was Halal Amr. They were sharing their data, like this is what they need, this is what they have distributed, and they were sharing this data on daily basis. At that point, we were like 2-people team, and we were like manually updating all this data. We're getting an email, we're uploading it, we're getting update and uploading it. Then Google jumped in, and Google, what they did, they had a massive platform with the Google Crisis. And they said, okay, let's put this map on that, so international organizations can use that as well. So they embedded the map into there. And coming back to the local incorporation of the data, so Army was one of the main relief and rescue facilitator during all these natural disasters. So what they did, they incorporated the Google MapMaker data into their system to save a lot of lives from the remote areas. And this was the statement they released on press, where this is still available on their ISPR website. And this was like a real recognition of all the contribution that every person has done in there. So this was the Pakistan in 2008. This was Pakistan 2012. And these are like some of the top contributors. If I wanted to go into details, I could go with individual and tell you like what they have done. But for like a quick one, Nazar Hayat Khan is like a retired pilot living in somewhere remote near Peshawar, Islamabad. And he single-handedly mapped all the northern areas and the river streams and the roads. It was amazing. And Usman Latif, Omar Sheikh, Faraz Ahmed. Omar Sheikh, he was in Lahore, then he moved to Dubai. Faraz was from Glasgow. So it was not just the local people, it was like around the world. They were just jumping in and they were doing all the contributions. There is a comprehensive list of all, or not all, but most of the mappers at this link, you can see. And thank you. That's great. Do anybody have a question? Sir.
So it's a short question and it's a little pretty one. We had a question in our HCI made to describe the interactive system of Google Maps. So there were options that whether it's a pointer click or whether it's a WIMP, Windows icons and mouse and pointer. So we had to choose between that option. So I wanted to confirm from you, which one would you prefer? Yeah, I know we had to describe the interactive interaction with the Google Maps. So there were 2 options, whether it's a point and click, that you just point and click somewhere to use that Google Maps, or whether it's a WIMP. WIMP is basically Windows. Like for me, I choose WIMP because Google Maps has different windows. You can review places and you can see their details, and there are icons that you can click and touch and interact with them. So I just wanted to confirm it from you.
So Vim is like another tool?
It's an interactive system. Vim,
okay, for me, Vim, I'm a coder, so Vim is the tech editor for me.
Yeah, no, not Vim. That's a different name. WIMP, W-I-M-P.
WIMP, right, okay, I see. I haven't used Vim, so I can't really suggest anything about that one.
Yeah.
Why I focused on Google Maps was basically because it was one of the main tools used by a majority of people around the world, and especially in developing countries, mostly because the Android was in majority as a phone, and it was available for most people. There were other maps, Apple Maps came in after that, and we had OpenStreetMaps before that, but they were a little bit different platforms than this one. So we were actually challenged in a way, like, why don't you go on an OpenStreetMap? The data is open.
Yeah.
So I mean, we did not have that kind of facilitation in the OpenStreetMap at that point.
Yes.
Later, it became almost identical to Google Map Maker. And it was actually Usman Latif, which was one of the advocates as well. He actually went on after the Google Map Maker stopped and it was discontinued. He actually went on to Google OpenStreetMap and he continued working on there. So this is not like we're choosing a product specifically. It is basically what is best for people. Because all these contributors who worked on it, they were not Google employees. They were all volunteer. I was studying in university and I was mapping in my free time. Same goes for everybody else who was like, some are working, some are studying, and they are only mapping in their free time. So it is like a volunteer-based all efforts.
I have another question that's based mostly on security. So my Google Maps data, it records everything, wherever I go, wherever I visit, and I can view that in my timeline, that on this day I was over here, and on this day I was here. And after each month, it gives you statistics of the places that you have visited and the countries that you have been to. So how secure is that information? Like, they have information on every single person, where they have been. And there was a recent leak that this information have been used to create the design patterns of secure buildings for the users that were using Google Maps, or the location services were active on their places.
So I love that timeline that comes after a month.
Yes.
But the problem is, this data we allow Google to take. It's not like they take it away. We allow it. So we give it to them.
We give it.
Yeah. So it is as secure as we are, like about our data. If you don't want to give it to it, it will never go in there. About the security problems, that is basically a government problem to solve. And we mapped Pakistan as ethical as possible. I've been kicked out.